Louis XVII, from birth to 1789 known as Louis Charles, Duke of Normandy, then from 1789 to 1791 as Louis Charles, Dauphin of France, and from 1791 to 1792 as Louis Charles, Prince Royal of France, was the younger son of King Louis XVI of France and Queen Marie Antoinette. As the son of the king, he was a fils de France. His older brother, Louis Joseph, died in June 1789, just a few weeks before the start of the French Revolution, when his father was executed on the 21st of January 1793. During the middle period of the French Revolution, he became King of France and Navarre in the eyes of the Royalists. However, since France was by then a republic, and Louis XVII had been imprisoned from August 1792 until his death from illness in 1795 at the age of 10, he was never officially king, nor did he rule. His title was bestowed by his royalist supporters and acknowledged implicitly by his uncle's later adoption of the regnal name Louis XVIII rather than Louis XVII. Upon the restoration of the Bourbon monarchy in 1814. Biography. Louis Charles de France was born at the Palace of Versailles, the second son and third child of his parents, Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. He became the Dauphin at the death of his elder brother, Louis Joseph. Like all royal children of the time, Louis Charles was cared for by multiple people. The Queen appointed governesses to look after all three of her living children. Louis Charles's original governess was Yolande de Palastrin, Duchess de Polignac, who left France near the beginning of the Revolution. She was replaced by Marquise Louise Elizabeth de Tourzel. Additionally, the Queen selected Agathe de Rambaud to be the official nurse of Louis Charles. Alain Decaux wrote, Madame de Rambaud was officially in charge of the care of the Dauphin from the day of his birth until the 10th of August 1792, in other words, for 7 years. During these 7 years, she never left him. She cradled him, took care of him, dressed him, comforted him, scolded him. Many times, more than Marie Antoinette, she was a true mother for him. On the 6th of October 1789 the royal family was forced by the Revolution to move from Versailles to the Tuileries Palace in Paris, where they spent the next 3 years. There the family lived a secluded life, and Marie Antoinette dedicated most of her time to her children, especially the little Dauphin. On the 21st of June 1791 the family tried to escape in secrecy in an incident known as the Flight to Varennes, but the attempt failed after the family was recognized and returned to Paris. When the Tuileries was stormed by an armed mob on the 10th of August 1792, the royal family sought refuge at the Legislative Assembly. On the 13th of August, the royal family was imprisoned in the Tower of the Temple. At first their conditions were not extremely harsh, but they were prisoners and were restyled as captives by the newborn republic. The king, Louis XVI, was separated from his family and tried in December. Naming from birth to 1789, as a second son, he was known officially as Louis Charles, Duke of Normandy, and colloquially as the Prince du Sang, then on becoming heir apparent as a 4-year-old after the death of his 7-year-old older brother, the Dauphin Louis Joseph, from a quick-acting illness from the 4th of June 1789 to October 1791. He became styled officially as Louis Charles, Dauphin of France. The old monarchy title would be explicitly stripped under the new written French Constitution of 1791, which made France a short-lived constitutional monarchy. Under the new constitution, the heir to the throne was restyled as the Prince Royal, would be retitled as Prince Français, the new dignity taking effect from the inception of the Legislative Assembly on 1 October 1791. From October, when the old title gave way to the new official substitute, and then beyond into the following August 1792 when he was imprisoned, he was known as Louis Charles, Prince Royal of France. He held the new title when imprisoned in August 1792, after the family failed to escape the Republic. until he became the uncrowned king in January 1793, at least in the eyes of royalist factions and foreign international powers hoping to restore the monarchy. As the son of the king, he was sometimes written about his affairs to France, and in most historiography is primarily listed as Louis XVII of France. Since with the Bourbon Restoration, his uncle took Louis XVIII as regnal name. Prison and rumors of escape 1793. Disputed accession after the execution of his father on 21 January 1793. Louis became, for the Royalists, King of France, and a week later his uncle, the Count of Provence, arrogated to himself the title of regent. From that moment plots were hatched for the escape of the prisoners from the Temple, the chief of which were engineered by the Chevalier de Jauges, the Baron de Batz, and the faithful Lady Atkins. On 3 July the little orphan was again separated from his mother, this time to be given into the keeping of the cobbler Antoine Simon, who had been named his guardian by the Committee of General Security. The tales told by royalist writers of the barbarous cruelty inflicted by Simon and his wife on the child are not proven. Marie-Jeanne, in fact, took great care of the child's person. But the Simons did not raise Louis as a prince, and stories survive narrating how he was encouraged to eat and drink to excess, and learned the language of the gutter. The foreign secretaries of England and Spain also heard accounts from their spies that the boy was raped by prostitutes in order to infect him with venereal diseases to supply the commune with manufactured evidence against the Queen. But the scenes related by A. B. chain of the physical martyrdom of the child are not supported by any other testimony, though he was at this time seen by a great number of people. On 6 October, Paca, Chalmette, Jacques Hébert and others visited him and secured his signature to charges of sexual molestation against his mother, his sister and his aunt. The next day he was confronted with his elder sister Marie-Thérèse Charlotte for the last time. 1794. Imprisoned prince becomes ill. Simon's wife then fell ill, and on 19 January 1794 the Simons left the temple, after securing a receipt for the safe transfer of their ward, who was declared to be in good health. A large part of the temple records from that time onward were destroyed under the Bourbon Restoration, so that exact knowledge of the facts is practically impossible. 2 days after the departure of the Simons, the prince is said by the Restoration historians to have been put in a dark room which was barricaded like the cage of a wild animal. The story runs that food was passed through the bars to the boy, who survived in spite of the accumulated filth of his surroundings. Robespierre visited Marie-Thérèse on the 11th of May, but no one, according to the legend, entered the Dauphin's room for 6 months until Barras visited the prison after the 9th Thermidor. Barras's account of the visit describes the child's suffering from extreme neglect, but conveys no idea of the alleged walling in. It is nevertheless certain that during the first half of 1794 he was very strictly secluded. He had no special guardian, but was under the charge of guards who changed from day to day. Louis was abused often, but the boy made no complaint to Barras of his ill treatments, possibly because he feared to do so. He was then cleaned and reclothed. His room was cleaned, and during the day he was visited by his new attendant, a Creole and a compatriot of Josephine de Beauharnais, named Jean-Jacques Christophe Laurent. From the 8th of November onward, Laurent had assistance from a man named Gomin. The child was then taken out to walk on the roof of the tower. From about the time of Gomin's entrance the boy was inspected, not by delegates of the Commune, but by representatives of the Civil Committee of the 48 sections of Paris. The rare occurrence of the same inspectors would obviously facilitate fraud, if any such were intended. From the end of October onward the child maintained an obstinate silence, explained by Laurent as a determination taken on the day he made his deposition against his mother. On the 19th of December 1794 he was visited by 3 commissioners from the Committee of General Security, J. B. Harmond de la Meuse, B.C. Matthew and J. Revachon, who extracted no word from him. 1795. Death on Lawrence. Retirement. Etienne Lano was appointed on 31 March 1795 to be the child's guardian. In May 1795 the prisoner was seriously ill, and a doctor, J. Desault, well acquainted with the Dauphin having visited him 7 months earlier, was summoned. However, Desault died suddenly, not without suspicion of poison, on June 1. And it was some days before other doctors named Pelletan and Dumangan were called. It was announced that Louis Charles died alone on June 8. Next day an autopsy was conducted, mainly by Pelletan, at which it was stated that a child apparently about 10 years of age, which the commissioners told us was the late Louis Capet's son, had died of a scrofulous infection of long standing. He was buried on the 10th in the cemetery of St. Marguerite, but no stone was erected to mark the spot. Scrofula, as it was previously known, is nowadays called tuberculous cervical lymphadenitis, referring to a lymphadenitis of the neck lymph nodes associated with tuberculosis. Following a tradition of preserving royal hearts, his heart was smuggled out. It was preserved by the examining physician, Philippe Jean Pelletan. Louis Charles's body was buried in a mass grave. Dr. Pelletan was shocked at all the scars from abuses of the poor boy, such as whippings, all over the front and back of his torso as well as on his arms, legs, and feet. Controversy. The weak parts of this story have been identified as the sudden and unexplained departure of the Simons, the subsequent cruel treatment of the child, keeping him in a dark room practically out of sight, while his sister Marie-Thérèse was in comparative comfort, the cause of death declared to be of long standing, but in fact developing rapidly, and the fact that the disease is usually not fatal and is self-limiting, the insufficient excuse provided for the child's muteness under Gommon's regime, and the irregularities in the formalities in attending the death and the funeral, when a simple identification of the body by Marie-Thérèse would have prevented any doubt of his death. Immediately on the announcement of the Dauphin's death, a rumor arose that he had escaped. Simeon Despréaux, one of Louis XVIII's authors, stated in 1814 that Louis XVII was living and someone possessed proof of this, and Eckhard, one of the mainstays of the official account, left among his unpublished papers a statement that many members of an assembly of our wise men obstinately named Louis XVII as the prince whom their wishes demanded. Unfortunately, the removal of the child suited the plans of the Comte de Provence, now Louis XVIII, along with those of the revolutionary government. The royal family made no serious attempt to ascertain the truth, though they paid no tributes to the memory of the deceased king as might have been expected, had they been convinced of his death. Even his sister wore no mourning for him until she arrived at Vienna and saw that this was expected of her. Lost Dauphin claimants. As rumors quickly spread that the body buried was not that of Louis Charles and that he had been spirited away alive by sympathizers, the legend of the Lost Dauphin was born. When the Bourbon monarchy was restored in 1814, hundreds of claimants came forward. Would-be royal heirs continued to appear across Europe for decades afterward, and some of their descendants still have small but loyal retinues of followers today. Popular candidates for the Lost Dauphin included John James Audubon, the naturalist, Eliza Williams, a missionary from Wisconsin of Mohawk Native American descent, and Carl Wilhelm Naundorff, a German clockmaker. However, DNA testing conducted in 1993 proved that Naundorff was not the Dauphin. Carl Wilhelm Naundorff's story rested on a series of complicated intrigues. According to him, Barras determined to save the Dauphin in order to please Josephine de Beauharnais, the future empress. Having conceived the idea of using the Dauphin's existence as a means of dominating the Comte de Provence in the event of a restoration, the Dauphin was concealed in the fourth story of the tower, a wooden figure being substituted for him. Laurent, to protect himself from the consequences of the substitution, replaced the wooden figure with a deaf mute, who was presently exchanged for the scrofulous child of the death certificate. The deaf mute was also concealed in the temple. It was not the dead child, but the Dauphin who left the prison in the coffin, to be retrieved by friends before it reached the cemetery. Naundorf, or Naundorf, arrived from nowhere in Berlin in 1810, with papers giving the name Karl Wilhelm Naundorf. He said he was escaping persecution and settled at Spandau in 1812 as a clockmaker, marrying Johanna Reinert in 1818. In 1822 he removed to Brandenburg, and in 1828 to Crossen, disambiguation needed, near Frankfurt. He was imprisoned from 1825 to 1828 for coining, though apparently on insufficient evidence, and in 1833 came to push his claims in Paris, where he was recognized as the Dauphin by many persons formerly connected with the court of Louis XVI. Expelled from France in 1836, the day after bringing a suit against the Duchess of Angoulême for the restitution of the Dauphin's private property. He lived in exile until his death at Delft on 10 August 1845, and his tomb was inscribed, Louis XVII, Roi de France et de Navarre. The Dutch authorities, who had inscribed on his death certificate the name of Charles Louis de Bourbon, Duc de Normandy, permitted his son to bear the name de Bourbon, and when the family appealed in 1850–51, and again in 1874, for the restitution of their civil rights as heirs of Louis XVI, no less an advocate than Jules Favre pleaded their cause. Richemont's tale that Mrs. Simon, who was genuinely attached to him, smuggled him out in a basket, is simple and more credible, and does not necessarily invalidate the story of the subsequent operations with the deaf-mute and the scrofulous patient. Laurent in that case being deceived from the beginning, but it renders them extremely unlikely. Richemont was in prison in Milan for 7 years and began to put forward his claims in Paris in 1828. In 1833 he was again arrested, was brought to trial in the following year and condemned to 12 years imprisonment. He escaped after a few months and left the country, to return in 1840. He died at Gleize on 10 August 1853, the name of Louis Charles de France being inscribed on his tomb until the government ordered its removal. Williams, a third pretender, Eleazar Williams, did not affect to know anything of his escape. He possessed, he said, no consciousness of his early years, only emerging from idiocy at the age of 13, when he was living with an Indian family in New York. He was a missionary to the Indians when the Prince de Joinville, son of Louis Philippe, met him, and after some conversation asked him to sign a document abdicating his rights in favor of Louis Philippe, in return for which he, the Dauphin, was to receive the private inheritance which was his. This Eleazar Williams refused to do. Williams' story is generally regarded as false. Burial of the Dauphin's remains. Although his remains were never properly interred with ceremony, there was little fanfare of his burial reportedly on the day of June 9 of 1795. At 7 o'clock the police commissary ordered the body to be taken up, and that they should proceed to the cemetery. It was the season of the longest days, and therefore the interment did not take place in secrecy and at night. As some misinformed narrators have said or written, it took place in broad daylight, and attracted a great concourse of people before the gates of the Temple Palace. Added, the funeral entered the cemetery of St. Marguerite, not by the church, as some accounts assert, but by the old gate of the cemetery. The interment was made in the corner, on the left, at a distance of 8 or 9 feet from the enclosure wall, and at an equal distance from a small house, which subsequently served as a school. The grave was filled up, no mound marked its place, and not even a trace remained of the interment.